Speaking of how we end up responding, we continue to watch Parliament Hill to see if any more ministers emerge to offer us some insight into exactly what they do plan on do. At the provincial level, some premiers are speaking up, including Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who continues to threaten to cut off electricity south of the border. Have a listen.
If he wants to destroy our economy and our families, I will shut down the electricity going down to the U.S. And I'm telling you, we will do it. It's unfortunate. I would rather ship you more electricity, ship you more critical minerals. I want to ship you more energy, more potash to keep your farmers going, and uranium that you use for your nuclear power. It comes through from Saskatchewan over to Ontario, and it's going to be a massive, massive problem.
Let's get some more perspective on where this goes from here from Derek Burney. He was Chief of Staff to the late former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney and Canadian Ambassador to the U.S. from 1989 to 1993. Mr. Burney, always good to see you. I do wish it were under different circumstances. Thanks for making the time.
Oh, you're welcome, Fashy. I do too.
I wanted to start off on something that Donald Trump said this afternoon, and specifically because, yes, through the executive order, this has been tied to the border, but he has spoken about so many other incentives for the application of tariffs. And today he was pretty specific. Move your auto plants from Canada to the United States and you can avoid tariffs. What does that tell you?
Well, it tells me that the president and his administration have really slipped their ethical and moral moorings in a very dangerous way. Today is almost as bad for us as Friday was for President Zelensky when he got manhandled by the president, and more particularly the vice president, in the most unseemly manner I've ever seen in contact between leaders. So, you know, Donald Trump, I almost said rump, Donald Trump told us that if we cleaned up our act on the border, we could avoid these tariffs. Well, that was a lie, because we have cleaned up our act, but that didn't faze him. He's breaking every convention of trade rules with this action. The WTO, the USMCA, and every international trade law that you could think of. So my hope is that the government is not only poised to retaliate in kind, in a calibrated manner, and I'm pleased to see Premier Ford taking the position he's taking, but I have to assume that we've engaged U.S. trade lawyers through our embassy in Washington in order to litigate this before the WTO, before the USMCA, and before the U.S. courts themselves. This president is breaking a treaty he has with Canada. And his actions are totally unjustified. What he's saying about the auto industry simply displays his ignorance about how those companies operate. And the president of Ford has courageously said as much himself. These are not distinct entities. You can't just move the manufacturing from Canada to the United States and keep it whole. It's not that simple, any more than he could conclude a peace agreement with Russia in one day, as he promised when he got elected. No, it's very discouraging. I've already laid out an agenda on what I think the government should do in reaction to this. And, you know, we simply, the one good thing, if there is he's inspired a degree of patriotism in Canada with his unjustified actions. I mean, cruel actions. These are cruel actions that are going to affect families, not just in Canada, but in the United States as well. Some of his advisors should know that, and yet they're all behaving like toadies to the king, as they did on Friday in that terrible exchange in the White House, which will never be forgotten by Ukrainians, I guarantee you. But if they expect Ukrainians to grovel in the White House or in the Kremlin, then they don't know Ukrainians as I do.
I wanted to ask you about the Canadian government's response when you talk about it being calibrating. And because we're on live TV, I'm going to ask a favor. If you could sit back, just because part of your head gets cut off when you lean forward. I understand your enthusiasm, but that's perfect the way you are right now, right at this moment. Do you think what the government has laid out so far in the form of counter tariffs is the right calibrated response?
Well, from what I know about it, and I don't know a great deal of the detail, Vashi, but from what I do know, and from what I heard our ambassador in Washington say on your program earlier, yeah, I think they've got their mind going in the right direction. But you know, I just say again, whatever happens is going to be very damaging, but not just for Canadians. And you know, I said in an article I wrote just yesterday that we have to conduct a war of fact, not a war of emotion. We cannot counter the bombast of Donald Trump. Nobody can. But we can try to raise the support of sensible Americans who understand the reality of the two economies which, you know, over 5 decades had brought mutual benefit to both countries. And we can't be whipsawed by the zany impulses of one man. And that's what's happening. And there's unfortunately not enough of a pushback in the United States itself. That's very disappointing to me, because I would have thought that particularly in Congress and also from American business, there would have been a stronger pushback. You know, this president is facing 94 court trials right now about his domestic agenda. That's why I'm appealing. Hopefully, the government will take the same track, because every convention that's known in the trade world is being broken by this administration. It really is a shaking experience. I feel even more sad today than I felt on Friday for poor President Zelensky being beaten up in a very uncivil manner. And then they claim that he showed no respect. I mean, can you imagine treating an individual whose English is not his first language in the manner that they did, hectoring him, constantly interrupting him and challenging him? And all the toadies from the cabinet just sat around nodding. That's pathetic behavior, pathetic.
I'm going to leave it on that note. Mr. Burney, really appreciate you making the time to share your insights tonight. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Veggie. Take care.